Mr. Nick Freeman, a man who has many shared campaigns with me and many shared beliefs as well. Nick, a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. This seems to me to be, sort of imposing bike lanes on the populace of this country by stealth, because what we do know is an awful lot of people sort of woke up one morning to discover that they lived now in a low traffic neighbourhood, or they live now in a road which previously didn't have a bike lane but now does. And the government are basically saying to councils, if you've put one up, just leave it there.
Yeah, what's happened is we've had very quiet roads during lockdown, and the councils have thought this looks a really good idea. Let's impose some bike lanes, and instead of having proper consultation and working out the statistics, etc., they've just put these bike lanes in. Boris Johnson and his cohorts are avid cyclists. They're obviously, and I support the fact that they support the green movement, but it needs to be done sensibly and proportionately. And what they're doing now is saying, well, these bike lanes are in situ, and if you remove them hastily, we will withhold government money, grants, that are at the moment due to come your way. So we've got this sort of financial blackmail being imposed on local councils. And we've already seen many examples of these bike lanes being ripped out shortly after they've been imposed, because councils realise very quickly that the problems they cause with emergency services, with local businesses, with residents. And the reality is this: we have very limited road space, and there are an increasing number of different types of users. And some of those users, of course, are environmentally friendly, and that is going to increase. And we are going to have a situation in the next 9 years where most of our cars, or a significant proportion of our cars, are going to be electric, and they are going to need somewhere to go. And the last thing we want is to have congestion. We don't want to block emergency services, and we don't want to cause the hard-strapped businesses that have endured the pandemic any further difficulties. So we need the consultation, which unfortunately isn't happening. This is a knee-jerk reaction by the government, by councils, in imposing these bus lanes. And now it's another knee-jerk reaction in saying, look, you rip them up and you're going to pay the cost. We're going to hit you where it hurts in your pocket. So we recognise that we need to work out what's going to happen to our road space. And in my view, Mike, what we need to do is we need to look at pavements, because they are, of course, designed for pedestrians. They can be narrowed, and we could seize a proportion of the pavement and maybe a smaller proportion of the road to facilitate everybody. Because at the moment, it seems to be, if you'll excuse the pun, one-way traffic.
Yes.
What we see is a grab of roads. And, we're trying to move towards zero emissions. The carbon footprint that's going to be caused by brakes, by tyres, by stationary congested vehicles, albeit electric ones, is going to shoot itself in the foot. It's going to defeat the whole purpose of the exercise. So the government needs to think seriously and sensibly about this and work out with the correct experts, how do we actually proceed to get the optimum result, the best result? And at the moment, what we're seeing is, well, we just want cyclists, we want e-scooter riders, we want anything that's green and friendly, and we don't really care about the consequences in terms of crime, emergency services, damage to the economy. It's a blind approach, it's an ill-thought-out approach, and really, we just need proper consultation, and then the job's going to be done properly, because it's such a waste of money to put these things in place, then to rip them out, with the financial implications that is involved, and then of course the cost to local business. Business is there. We need the business. We need it to flourish. So we just need to work it out, and that's not happening.
I mean, we talk about welcoming business back to London. We've got the government saying to American business people and European business people, you can now come to this country without fear or favour. We're not going to make you do quarantine. However, they're going to come here and they're going to find that they're going to be stuck in a taxi without any ability to get anywhere, because it's so congested now in London without it even going back to sort of normal levels of traffic. Not least because there are so many buses doing the rounds, not least because there is nowhere really to park for a lot of delivery vehicles. I mean, I'm seeing more and more, parking bays which were used as delivery, possibilities for lorries and things, which have been taken over now by the bikes. And they've filled the parking bay with a load of these bikes for hire, and so you can't park there anymore. So the only way you can stop to deliver stuff is to park in the main lane of the traffic. So everybody gets held up. I mean, there is a consistently, I would say, anti-motorist agenda going on.
Yeah, one doesn't want to use the word war on motorists, but in effect, there's a land grab going on. And the whole purpose of this is to try and improve the environment, which is laudable. But the ironical thing is the way the government is doing it is actually having the opposite effect, because it's causing more congestion and more economic trouble for businesses, as well as things like blocking emergency services and causing huge stress and aggravation for everyone who's trying to use our limited road space. So they just need to strip it all away, sit down calmly with all the relevant parties and work out how are we going to do this so that it's sensible and fair for everybody.
Yes.
Why should the motorists, who contribute massively financially in terms of vehicle exercise license, they contribute in terms of their tax on the petrol, why should they be the ones who are financing everything for the cyclists and other road users? And that's why I say we need to looking at the pavements and maybe taking a little bit of the pavements. And also, of course, that there are things that need to be done, because most cyclists and most e-scooter riders will tell you that even if we have cycle lanes, and there are cycle lanes by the dozen or by more, they're not safe. They're not fit for purpose because they're full of debris, they're littered with potholes, and they feel actually safer on the main carriageway. So we've got these lanes, we're taking them off the motorists. The motorists can't go in the cycle lane, but the cyclists can go in the motor lane, and that's what they're doing to preserve their own safety. Of course, they're very vulnerable.
And
they're
again,
far more likely to be hurt. We need to protect them.
Yeah,
so
and again, when you look at certain parts of London, and I'm sorry to those people who are outside of London to be London-centric about this, but it's what I know. Certain parts of the West End where they've taken a a stretch of road and made it into one lane, so they can put a cycle lane in. If you're driving down there, you're behind a bus, and when the bus stops, you have to stop because you can't get round the bus because there's no other lane. So it's absolutely causing chaos for anyone who's trying to get from point A to point B in a vehicle. And I don't mean somebody like me who perhaps could use a different form of travel if I wanted to, but if you're a delivery driver, if you're a van driver, if you've got goods to take to places, then you have to be in a vehicle.
Yeah. Look, we need a huge investment, don't we, in the infrastructure. If you look at the Netherlands, they actually have subways for cyclists so that they don't need to come into any contact with the roads at all. Their cycle lanes are absolutely superb, but it doesn't happen overnight, and it requires substantial cash investment. And unless the government are prepared to do this, land-grabbing roads from the hard-pressed motorists is not going to work. It's going to cause a lot of antagonism, a great deal of financial costs, and a lot of stress and mental health issues. So we need, as I say, to sit down with various experts and calmly and sensibly and with an objective view work out what is the best way of trying to fill everyone's cup.
And because since you and I started this sort of campaign to get a petition going to get e-scooters properly legalised, to get cyclists properly registered and all of that, there's been an awful lot of incidents and accidents involving e-scooters, hasn't there?
Yeah, well, massively. And we did call this, Mike, before the e-scooters were actually introduced. Unfortunately, it's going to get worse and worse because what we have is thousands and thousands of illegal e-scooters on the road. I know the Meta trying to do something about it, but in a very half-hearted way. So every one of these e-scooters it's illegal. They can't be used on public roads. The only ones that can be used at the moment are the ones in London limited to 12.5 miles per hour under the rental scheme. And even those don't comply with the law because most of them think they can go on the pavement, they can go through red lights, they're up and down on the near side and off side of cars. They are a threat to themselves, and their design is dangerous. And the big problem about them, and I've always said this, and I know you and I agree, is who's riding them? So when they commit a misdemeanor, how are they ever held accountable? And that's why, same with cyclists, you can go to any set of red lights, stop your vehicle on red and watch how many e-scooters as a cyclist go through there on red. You imagine that happening with a car, people will be incensed. Yeah. And the law is currently in situ for people to comply, cyclists and e-scooters to comply with a red traffic light. Do they do it? No. Why not? Because they know they can cycle or ride with impunity because we have no idea who they are. Yeah. That's it. And that has to be wrong. It's against the spirit of the legislation. The government need again to be sensible about it and not turn a blind eye. Yeah. This problem's not going to go away. And then, of course, we have the massive crime, not just the road traffic issues and the design issues of these e-scooters, but we also have the amount of crime that's now being associated with e-scooters in terms of grabbing handbags and grabbing mobile phones. The police can't touch them. No. They've got no idea. And some of these e-scooters go up to 60 and 70 miles an hour. So it's a thieves' paradise. It's an ideal weapon for police for thieves. Yeah. So we need the government needs to sit down and deal with it properly. And of course, as with many things, this is not happening. There's no point just playing lip service to, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and it sounds good because it's green. It's actually having the opposite effect at the moment, and that's why the problem needs to be grasped.
And one of the big issues as well for an awful lot of people, and cab drivers have told me this, that Kensington High Street, which was one of the more famous sort of battlegrounds, if you like, for the cycle lane to be put in, then taken out, and then put back in again, and taken out again, was that they tell me that if you're in a wheelchair and you're disabled, you can't get to the taxi because there's a lane between the taxi and the pavement, which you cannot sort of cross, you can't traverse, because in a wheelchair it simply isn't possible. So if a taxi driver wants to drop somebody off where there's a cycle lane, it's actually rather dangerous.
It's very dangerous. You can't do it, and I'm sure that actually offends legislation that the government put in place to allow proper access to disabled people. So the government's probably flouting its own laws in terms of designing the roads in this particular way. So what we're seeing is a whole host of issues that need to be addressed. There needs to be a very serious and sensible debate, and it's not happening because these things are just being unfolded because it's part of the eco-friendly movement, and everyone thinks, well, what a great idea. Unless you happen to be a motorist, or unless you happen to be an ambulance driver, a police car, or involved in local business, or indeed a resident, suddenly your life's changed and not for the better.
Well, that's right. I mean, funnily enough, in my neck of the woods in Southwark, they're about to introduce parking bays, paid parking bays in streets where that has never been the case, which is also going to cause a problem. And it's simply there, once again, to punish you for having a car and to make it possible for them to make more money out of you when they don't need to.
Well, look, the motorist has always been an easy cash cow, and that situation is going to get worse because in December of this year, the government are actually going to give councils much greater power to enforce what at the moment are civil actions. So, for example, going into a yellow box, something that might be prosecuted by the police, that now will be prosecuted by the council. This is going to be wheeled out right across the country. So when councils are struggling for cash, who do they turn to? Let's have a go at the motorists. Let's see what we can get to them, because by and large, they're hard-working people, they're responsible, and they pay up. And we make it attractive for them to pay up because we incentivize it by introducing a lower fine if you pay up very quickly.
Yes.
And the motorist contributes in a massive way to the roads and to the tax system already.
Yeah.
How much does the e-scooter contribute? How much does the cyclist contribute? And people need to be real and accept, look, if we're going to use and share this road space, there has to be a financial contribution and we must be accountable. And I know some people are going to say, well, what about pedestrians? And maybe at some stage, we're going to have to look at that as well. And I know it sounds farcical, but we're a small island and we're overpopulated and we just don't have the space. So we have no choice but to make it work. And if we don't have proper consultation, it's never going to work. And we're going to cause a great deal of antagonism. We don't want people taking the rule of law into their own hands to try and enforce what they want. And, I'm fearful that that's actually what's going to happen if councils behave in a way that in essence is undemocratic.
Well, I've got a new one for you here, Nick. I've got a message from Jim who says, how about these resident-only roads? He's got a ticket, got fined for driving down a particular road in his neighbourhood because he doesn't live there.
Yeah, and the trouble is the law's changing all the time. Well, these signs are changing. It's a grab. It's a money grab, and people, of course, aren't familiar with it. So they're going down a road which they've always gone down, and all of a sudden, halfway down, they think, "Oh, am I allowed down here? I'm not sure." And of course, as far as the council are concerned, well, that's easy cash. And I would certainly encourage anybody who's in that situation to challenge it and say, look, it's my first time, I didn't know. And in my view, because these laws are being introduced so quickly, they also need to consider the unfamiliarity that drivers have, the motorists have, because there's so much road signage about. So that certainly for the first offence, particularly if they're outside the area, they're given a letter, a warning. The idea is not to punish people. The idea is to try and make people legally compliant. No motorist wants to impose deliberately a financial penalty upon themselves. That's not what happens. And yet, if you look at the statistics, you'd be tempted to think the opposite. But it's just because there is now so much out there for the motorist. It's not pleasant on our roads, but we do need to be mobile, and the motorists keep the economy afloat. There isn't really a viable alternative for many motorists, and that's why the motorists use their vehicle. And the government are going to have a huge hole very soon when more and more electric vehicles are on our roads. But that's probably going to be a conversation for another day.
Well, it will be. But I mean, we know from what Allegra Stratton wrote in the Telegraph the other day, she's now the new government spokesperson for the green agenda, basically saying things like, you can help the economy, you can help the planet by doing things like, for example, instead of driving to your shop to do your shopping, just walk. And you go, well, that's fine. But what if you've got to get 6 or 7 bags to carry back to the house,
Yeah. I don't know how familiar she is with a family shop, but, it's not a sensible suggestion, is it? It just doesn't work. And we don't have sufficient buses and alternative means of transport. You can't take those on cycles. You can't take the shopping on e-scooters. So there isn't an alternative. You need a boot. And that's why people take their cars to supermarkets. That's why we need to. There isn't an alternative. So it's a ridiculous suggestion, isn't it?
It really is. Absolutely.
It's idealistic. And the problem is, a lot of this is idealistic, but it's ill thought out.
Yes.
And that's the problem.
And it's for people who have got quite a lot of money as well. It's not for people who drive vans for a living. It's not for people who are now being hit with as much as a 40 quid daily charge to drive in and out of London to do their basic job. It's not aimed at people like that. It's aimed at sort of, the Volvo driving, Cotswold living, champagne swilling, iMac owning middle classes.
Yeah, it is. And as you say, they're not the ones who are actually going to suffer the most because their pockets can foot the bill. It's the people who are possibly at the slightly lower end of the scale.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Exactly right. Can we still get that petition signed? You want to direct people
absolutely,
to it?
Absolutely. We need to get to 10,000 signatories. I know you've got many Twitter followers. It's on the government website, or you can just look at the government website for signing the petition. Your name or my name, and it's there. And maybe you could feature it on your program so that people can sign it.
Yes, I will fish it out and
we're working towards 10,000, which will force the government to consider talking about it, which they're very reluctant to do. They've already said we're not going to do it, which is very interesting, isn't it? Because that, to me, recognises they know they've got a problem, and this problem is not going to go away. And people need to put their opinions on a petition so that we force things to happen. That's the only way. If you sit down and moan and do nothing about it, then nothing is going to change.
No.